I don't really read a lot of books, but Lord knows I've read this one a lot. This is a little review I wanted to do of Mick Foley's book, Have a Nice Day. And I've read this thing a lot because you can see I think I've read it at least 3 times through. And I've also read portions of it just because I love it so much. It's a great book from a really good wrestler, but also someone who's done so much in the wrestling business and done with other promotions and stuff. I really can't think of anyone that's really wrestled as much as he has compared to some other people. Like, some wrestlers just come up within an organization and just keep on going up and stay there for all their lives. But Mick Foley, he moved around. He did the early territories back in the late 80s and early 90s. He did the big 3, which is WCW, ECW, WWF, to me. I mean, that's amazing. You really get a really good picture of the landscape when you have guys that have gone through all 3. I always respect opinions of people like that, like Raven or Stone Cold. Guys that have been through the whole rigmarole of the big 3 is pretty neat. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about this book. I really like it. It's just, it has a lot of humor in the beginning when he's talking about his fascination with Jimmy Snuka and how he used to watch him dive off the cage and how he wanted to be that guy and how he wanted to imitate him and how he did that with his dude love gimmick. Also, he touches up on early romances and stuff and how it all seems to fail. He always does this one thing wrong and it goes bad from there. Like, one time he gave a girl a really bad kiss and she was really into him, and after that it was all over. And then one girl talked about how she's been loving him since their junior year there, and he corrected her and said, "I'm a freshman," and again it went off like that. And then the last one that he touches up on in his college days is a girl that didn't know his name. I think she calls him Mike. She thinks he's Mick Foley. And that's kind of what all started to jump off his friend's garage to help him try to, he wrote a little storyline out of his grievance over these girls. So it's pretty neat, the early years. Then he gets into fighting and training, and he becomes like a fall guy, just a guy that takes a bunch of hits, and he has this reputation of being able to take a lot of hits, and so they always treat him like that. So he never really gets a lot of offense. He's always doing all these jobs and always getting hit hard and just ragdolled around. It's really funny, just the predicaments he lands himself in. I wanted to read a few quotes, a few passages in this book. This is during his WCW stays. I think it's his second one, I believe. Kip Fry was almost the exact opposite of Jim Herd. Whereas Herd was gruff, Fry was polite to a fault. Also, whereas Herd tended to be tight with $1, someone in the Turner organization must have authorized a budget increase because Fry started throwing around money. It was almost as if Kip was walking around looking for acceptance from the wrestlers, and he decided the best way to do it was by signing them to big contracts. Hell, the Freebirds were given $50,000 raises and then were taken off the road for 6 months. Kip was also like a kid when it came to appearing on television. After his first appearance on the tube, he sprinted to the back and picked up the phone. "Did you see me? Did you see me?" he inquired anxiously, as I wondered just what qualifications were required to run a multi-million-dollar wrestling company. On the way to the matches one day, Diamond Dallas Page was singing Fry's praises. "The good thing about Kip," said DDP, "is that he's willing to listen to the wrestlers." Kevin Nash thought about it and countered, "The good thing about Kip is he's sexy in a shy kind of way." I love that random shit. He talks about how Kevin Nash is kind of like a backstage comic. Just he'd randomly break out a serious joke out of nowhere. Just good stuff. And then after Kip Fry, I was going to read this passage. I like this. Bill Watts, who's a hard-nosed wrestling promoter, came in to take over things. And these I'll begin here with the Bill's commandments. "Thou shalt not jump off the top rope. Thou shalt not play cards in the dressing room. Thou shalt not land on protective mats. outside the ring. Thou shalt not bring your children into the locker room. Thou shalt not bring wives to the television tapings. Thou shalt not use sleeper holds. I like that one. Heels shall not travel with baby faces. Thou shalt not talk to each other outside of the arena. Thou shalt not stay in the same hotel together. Thou shalt not train in the same gym together. And the biggest commandment of them all, thou shalt not leave the building until the final bell of the final match. That guy's intense. And it goes on. The last was the one that angered the boys the most. Nikita Koloff questioned his commandment at a meeting a short time later. Bill addressed the boys and then asked if there were any questions. Koloff raised his hand and when called on made a plea for sanity. Yeah, Bill, I know it's important for the guys to stay until the end. But sometimes, when we've been away from our families for a few weeks, we might have a chance to catch a flight home. Do you think in those situations, we might be able to get out a little earlier? Bill thought about it for about a second and a half, and then with all the warmth and sensitivity of an IRS auditor, shot forth, yeah, it's a tough business on families. Any more question? Okay, let's go. It's classic. The stuff that he went through is just amazing. The injuries, the bad promoters. He also talks about some of the feuds he kind of has. The biggest one, of course, is Ric Flair, who really didn't see his talent and really didn't utilize him the best he could. And then also they had disagreements about his injuries, where Foley would say, "Hi, I'm injured, I can't fight this." And Flair almost said, "Maybe you aren't so injured." Kind of called his bluff on it and tried to, give him the fight anyway. So it's just a bad relationship. And it doesn't feel so bad now since they're like, what are they, feuding in TNA now? So it kind of feels like, it kind of takes away the impact of the ratings. He also didn't like J.J. Dillon because J.J. Dillon would always be that guy he called in the WWF and ask if he could have a tryout or try to get into the company. And this is all during out the 90s. And I never got the deal with J.J. Dillon because everyone acted like he was a big deal, especially after he came to WCW and became like a on-air face. Like, oh, here comes J.J. Dillon to settle things. I was like, who the hell is J.J. Dillon? Why does he need to settle things? Why does he need to be in here? Just has no personality and isn't really interesting. But he would always give Foley a second and say, I don't think we're going to be needing your services anytime soon. And in the book, Foley just upsets him and he just kind of goes on a tirade of cussing. His third, like I would call, kind of guy he had beef with and feuded with was actually The Rock, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. It mostly started with little things. Of course, maybe The Rock taking too much liberties with chair shots to the head. But also, like, when he would throw ideas out to The Rock, like, he wouldn't go through with them, or he'd say he would, but he wouldn't. Like, he wanted to do a feud with him and The Rock to break up the Rock and Sock connection, with it being the idea that after he took so many chair shots, The Rock didn't see about him or anything after the show, and Rock felt uncomfortable doing that. And then he thought about, in the Rock and Sock connection, what he wanted The Rock to do was slowly get closer to liking Mick Foley, like, in stages, one by one by one by one, until they were like really close, and then the breakup would be more, instead of early disdain of Mick Foley. But what happened is pretty much The Rock kept his cool and just acted like a just always looked down on Mick Foley's character no matter what. In fact, he probably was more warm to him early in the relationship, so he kind of sabotaged that stuff like that, where Foley wanted to just draw in the fans more with their breakup, but whatever. Also, later in the book, he says in that four-way they had with, I think it was Big Show, Stone Cold, Rock, and him, that he wasn't really going to sell well for one guy, and the match was probably going to suck, and I think he was talking about alluding to The Rock. So those were really his major beefs in the business. One thing I found interesting, like the different people that invented different stuff in his life. Like I took note that the mandible claw came from Jim Cornette. He actually came up with it and had a good story behind it to really build it up and make it sound like this huge finishing move. When in actuality, it's really easy to apply and put two fingers in the guy's mouth, and he can react however to help sell the move. Also, of course, Terry Funk came up with the idea to start the Hell in a Cell match on top of the cage. That's no big surprise, because Terry Funk is a crazy old man. The funniest part is he listened to him. And then also the Socko thing, Al Snow came up with that. And actually it's funny reading this book because he makes fun of Al Snow a lot. He actually made it kind of a game to make fun of Al Snow during out. And it kind of loses, I don't know, it kind of gets old. I mean, that's kind of a little small drawback. It's just hearing about him making fun of, you know, Al Snow at any opportunity he can. I want to go back to about that Hell in a Cell match. What I didn't realize was right before that, I didn't know that Mick Foley was kind of a heatless wrestler at that point, because he had already, I think, tried to been corporate Dude Love, and he failed at that. So he was going back to being Mankind, and he already kind of played out Cactus Jack and stuff. So he was kind of, he was saying, I don't remember, I haven't watched the match in a long time, but he says he didn't get much of a pop when he came out to that match. And really that match won him back over, you know, with the fans. But the sad part is, like, right after that match, you know, he was so injured and shit that he, like, almost wanted to quit from wrestling right there, because he wasn't feeling it from the fans. Like, he'd go to malls, he's talking about where people would rather, you know, get stuff signed by Sable than him. And, you know, he goes off on a rant about fun bags and stuff, and how if he had them, he'd be really popular and stuff. Foley. And also, like, his kind of style was out back then, because the Attitude Era kind of came in, and it was all about catchphrases and, you know, crotch shots and people's elbows, all this theatrical stuff, and all these little catchphrases, where he would go out there and he would do, you know, like an interview that was really intense and tried to really draw people in, and then someone comes out there and says, "You all smell," you know, it doesn't sync up. It's hard to, once you go that route, it's hard to go back to the realness and the real intensity of what his character was. So it's almost like the Mankind character didn't fit in with the whole landscape, and that match really helped bring him back to a point. One thing I really find interesting about Mick Foley is, despite everything, I would say what's really neat is he stayed over, I'd say, during a long period, despite having one of the worst, probably, win-loss ratios in wrestling history. Because I know he jobbed a lot in WCW, a lot. I remember, like, you know, I know Vader won more of those matches than he did. And when he feuded with Sting, I remember Sting was saying, Sting flat out told him, "You're going to lose these matches." And, you know, he knew what his role was, just to be a monster heel for Sting. But what he told Sting was, "Hey, I believe that if we have a good enough match, even though I'm going to lose, I could still get over by it." And that speaks volumes about the guy. And he's lost all these matches in WCW. I think he did fairly well in ECW. And then he goes to WWF, and, you know, he loses a lot of those matches against The Undertaker, because The Undertaker is really pushed down everyone's throats no matter what. And he's a good guy. I'm not saying The Undertaker's bad. I just wish sometimes he doesn't really need to win so much, because he could give more at this point in his career, especially at this point. But back then, he could even have given some more. But yeah, it was real interesting. You think about in those lines how many matches Foley's lost. It just makes everything he's done so much more important, because he had a lot of moments where people could just stop believing in him or stop wanting to watch him. And his wife tried to remind him of that during the whole book. She's reminded him, said, "You're better than this, Foley. You know, you could do this. You should win this match." She didn't like him becoming too cartoonish either. She didn't want him to be some kind of job guy, just going show to show. She really wanted the best for him in the wrestling world. So yeah. Breathe, Cody. I have one more little snippet. Let's go to it. Also, there was a feud that I really didn't mention. It's not really a feud, but he always got upset that Mark Marrow made more money than him for the first 2 years in the WWF. It really upset him. So yeah. Also, something I find interesting is Mick Foley was really smart with his negotiations with Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon had all these, he had like a full name instead of Mankind. It was like, you know, Mason, Manslaughter, World Peace. You know, it's just like this long ass name. It wouldn't have done good. And like his first face mask thing was like metal and shit with like a Man in the Iron Mask deal. So I mean, he really worked with him and really, you know, carved out his own existence within the company. A lot of people, you know, would do whatever Vince says and, you know, put on whatever chicken suit he had in the back and go out there and try to get over. But Foley actually, you know, played hardball when he wasn't even in a position to do so, because he was on the outs of WCW. ECW was still open arms to him, but it wasn't making as much money as he needed or wanted for his nest egg and stuff. Although that also mars this book a little bit too, is because he's always talking about his retirement and stuff, and he's still wrestling right now. I really wish he'd pack it up just for the sake of his legacy, whatever's left of it. You know, I love the guy. It's sad that, you know, he goes out, and I know it's not the same quality he had during his career, but hey, it's him, and if he can earn money doing it, whatever. I mean, I'm just not going to watch it and try to ignore whatever happens. But anyway, this is back in WWF when Vader and him were both there. After the taping, I rode with Vader. Alright. After the taping, I rode with Vader to San Diego. Vader had broken his eardrum during the evening, and asked me to drive. I was happy to, as Vader could quite possibly have been the worst driver in the business. He would look at you while he drove, and was quite fond of physically going over his matches in the car. I'd go boom, 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 he'd say, all the while throwing forearms at me that, although slow, would still connect. He was also the worst car singer I have ever heard. Everyone sings in the car, but Leon actually thought he was good. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back, and proceeded to ruin songs that I have grown up loving. I still can't bring myself to listen to Cat Stevens' Wild World. To this day, who sings this? To this very day, who sings this? I always asked Leon as he started to butcher a popular recording. The Beatles, he'd reply, or the name of whatever group happened to be singing at the time. Let's keep it that way, although my remarks never did stop his lyrical rampage. My main concern about Vader, however, was financial. That $2,500 tab he'd built up was still fresh in my mind as we headed to San Diego. I was compulsive about saving money in those days, especially because I had no idea how much of it I was going to make. I knew that to save money on the road, I was going to have to split rooms, but I had heard that Vader liked to have his own room at Marriott's around the country. This flew in the face of everything I had been brought up to believe, going back to the days when we used to jam 8 people in the room to see Springsteen. I had always split rooms, but with Vader, I was starting to have my doubts. By the time we arrived at San Diego Marriott, Vader had his shirt off with potato chip debris all tangled up in his chest hair. He had been drinking and was mumbling his words while alternating gaseous emissions between his mouth and his ass. That's a great line. I had to speak up. Money or no money. Leon, you usually like to go get your own room, don't you? I asked. Leon didn't answer, but nodded his head and burped. Me too, I said, while thinking of the sanctity of my own private bedroom. It's fun stuff. I love reading the book. I love trying to understand guys who I really didn't understand in the business back then. He gives a lot of insight to a lot of people and what they did good and why they were stuck around so long. So I would say it's definitely a good book, and I'd say you still should pick it up. And the only things really drawback is he's not retired to this day. And the other thing is, it was funny, like in the book he was kind of mocking the kind of amateur wrestling kind of style that they did in the early days in wrestling. And it was funny because he was making fun of it, but it kind of made a resurgence back there with Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit were doing that kind of style, and kind of got it catching on again. So you really can't say my style's the best with hardcore, or Matt Wrestling's the best, or I mean it all comes and goes. High flyers, big brawler style. It just, all this stuff just comes and goes, and you got to go with the flow. And also, one other thing that kind of stuck up in my mind, that just, he talks about how, now, back then I can understand this, but like in Tennessee, when he was working the territories, they wanted him to be kind of like a heel, and they wanted him to be like, you know how heels always cheat in matches and do those little things that make you know they're a heel. And back then, he disagreed with that because he wanted to be a strong heel. You know, just a bad guy. And he didn't need to cheat and stuff to win matches. And, you know, he would lose matches too. But just he wanted to be this competent guy. He just didn't want to be this Weasley heel who did all these little tricks to win. Which is really funny. Because, like, nowadays, you don't see that enough. You see too much of the strong heel, and I just thought it was funny in retrospect how it's gone so more towards a strong heel compared to a heel that cheats and wins. That's why, like, someone like Chris Jericho is such a great flashback to the past, watching him fight. So yeah, I thought it was interesting. It seemed the whole situation seemed kind of dated, you know, for what he was talking about. So yeah, some stuff just does that, and you just have to remember this is a long time. We're talking about late 80s back in Tennessee. So yeah, but yeah, I'd tell you to pick up this book if you haven't read it. It's a good read. You can rent it from the library probably by now. I hope so. I haven't been one of those in years. Great book. It's just, you know, you go on a journey with a guy who used to sleep in the back of his Ford Fairmont, to do wrestling training, to actually winning the title and making it big at one point. So yeah, it's just a real fun book. And you know, I would say it's like on the line of fans and not fans. I'd say it would really, wrestling fans would love this. But I mean, I always would be encouraged to say that it's a book for anyone, really, because it's about someone's life, and it's someone who's led a really interesting life, and that's what's really important about biographies like this. It's just, you have to have someone that had so many experiences. And yeah, definitely check it out if you haven't already. I'm sure everyone, probably most of everyone that's subscribed to me has already read this. A lot of wrestling fans. I really lost interest around the time Foley wasn't wrestling anymore for the WWF, but now he's doing TNA stuff, and I'm not really interested in that, because I don't know, that seems like the old WCW, where you just bring someone in each week and try to get a pop, and you forget about them and waste their talents. So that's what it feels like, and I don't like that. I get sick of that. But yeah, have a nice day. Bye bye. Bang bang, bang bang, bang bang. Oh, Foley, Mr. Sacco.